No one dared to speak in court, until a black little girl said, "I'm hungry." The words were so simple, yet they shattered the silence of the courtroom like glass breaking on stone. For years, this chamber had been ruled by discipline, fear, and authority. The strict judge, 60 years old, his hair silver and his eyes cold as steel, had built a reputation of being unshakable. Lawyers trembled before him. Powerful men bowed their heads in silence, and no one ever dared interrupt the sanctity of his court. But this day was different. The little girl, only 6 years old, with dark brown skin, round, innocent eyes, and clothes too worn to belong in such a polished hall, sat beside her father, the janitor of 35 years who had brought her with him because he had no choice. She had watched the entire morning in silence, her small hands folded in her lap, her stomach growling louder with each passing minute. And then, without fear, without hesitation, she spoke. "I'm hungry." The words echoed across the chamber, freezing every man in place. A lawyer's pen stopped mid-scratch. The guard stiffened, unsure if they had heard correctly. The janitor's heart slammed in his chest, his hand trembling as he tried to hush her, whispering, "Not here, not now." He knew the wrath this judge could unleash. He knew that one word out of turn could destroy lives. But the girl repeated it louder this time, her voice trembling but unbroken. "Daddy, I'm hungry." The gavel slammed down. Crack! The sound ripped through the silence like thunder, commanding obedience. Every man in the room flinched. All eyes snapped toward the bench, waiting for fury, for punishment. For the storm they were certain was about to break. The judge's cold gaze locked on the child. His hand still gripped the gavel, his knuckles white with tension. For a long moment, no one dared breathe. The courtroom, once buzzing with whispers and authority, now hung on the edge of a single decision. Would the judge unleash his legendary wrath? Would he silence the child as he had silenced countless others? Or would this innocent voice pierce through the armor of his authority? The audience leaned forward, their hearts racing. Lawyers exchanged nervous glances. Even the janitor himself bowed his head, bracing for the worst. But the little girl did not flinch. Her eyes, wide brown and filled with raw honesty, looked straight at the man on the bench. And for the first time in years, something cracked behind the judge's iron mask. The silence was unbearable. Every heartbeat in the courtroom seemed to echo against the walls. All eyes stayed locked on the judge, waiting for him to strike, to unleash the fury he was known for. But instead, he hesitated. His gavel lowered slowly, resting against the bench. His steel-gray eyes narrowed, not in rage, but in something no one had ever seen before: conflict. It was as though the voice of that child had slipped past the armor he had built for decades. For a man who prided himself on controlling every word, every breath within these walls, he suddenly found himself struggling to control his own. The janitor, a humble man of 35, rose halfway to his feet, his hand trembling as he tried to shield his daughter. I'm sorry, Your Honor. She didn't mean—" But the judge cut him off with a look, the kind of look that froze men in their tracks. Yet behind it was something strange, something softer. The little girl, only 6 years old, still sat on the wooden bench, swinging her legs nervously. She didn't understand the weight of her words or the silence she had summoned. She only knew her stomach hurt, and that her father could not give her what she needed. Her eyes, wide and innocent, blinked up at the judge as though expecting an answer. And for the first time in his long career, the judge felt powerless. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One leaned toward another and whispered, "This has never happened before." But even the whisper seemed loud, dangerous. Nobody knew what would happen next. The judge leaned back in his chair, gripping the arms of the bench so tightly the wood groaned under his hands. Memories flashed, of times he himself had gone hungry as a boy, before power and wealth hardened him. He had buried those memories deep, behind robes, behind titles, behind walls of authority. But this girl's voice tore those walls down in an instant. Still, pride battled within him. His reputation, his authority, his control. To show weakness here, to let a child disrupt his courtroom, that would undo everything he stood for. His lips parted, ready to shout, ready to end the moment with punishment and restore order. But when his gaze fell again on the janitor, humble, trembling, clutching his daughter as if the whole world was against him, Something shifted. The judge's hand hovered over the gavel once more. The crowd held its breath. Would he strike it down and shatter the moment? Or would he do something no one in that room could have ever imagined? The tension thickened. The air itself seemed to wait. And just when it felt like the silence could break every soul in the room, the judge spoke. His voice, deep and commanding, carried through the chamber. But this time, it was not filled with fire. It was heavy, measured, almost human. Bring the child something to eat. The words dropped like stones into the still water of the courtroom, sending shockwaves through every man present. The lawyers gasped. The guards exchanged glances of disbelief. The janitor froze, unable to believe what he had heard. And the little girl, she blinked, confused, then smiled the smallest, purest smile. And in that moment, the courtroom was never the same again. The words still hung in the air. Bring the child something to eat. The courtroom erupted, not with noise, but with stunned silence that somehow grew even heavier. For years, this strict judge was known to silence grown men with a single glare. He was feared, respected, untouchable. Yet here he was, breaking his own rules. For a 6-year-old homeless black girl, a guard hesitated, unsure if he'd heard correctly. The judge slammed the gavel once, not in anger, but as a command. Now, he growled. Within moments, one of the guards returned with food hastily taken from the courthouse. Cafeteria, simple bread, a piece of fruit, and a glass of water. Nothing extravagant, but to the girl, it looked like treasure. She reached out with tiny hands clutching the bread. She whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was soft, but in that courtroom it echoed louder than any testimony. The janitor's eyes filled with tears. His rough, calloused hands gripped the bench as he tried to hold himself together. He had faced humiliation, long hours, endless judgment from men who thought they were better than him. But in this moment, all that mattered was his daughter, safe, fed, smiling. The lawyers sat stunned, some whispering under their breath. This can't be real. The judge, showing mercy? But it was real. The judge leaned forward, his cold exterior cracked. He stared at the little girl with eyes that seemed haunted. Finally, he spoke again, this time softer than anyone had ever heard. No child, he said slowly, should have to beg for food in my courtroom. His words pierced deeper than any verdict he had ever delivered. The janitor bowed his head. Thank you, Your Honor, he murmured, his voice trembling. But then something unexpected happened. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. For a moment, he wasn't the man in the black robe. He wasn't the authority feared by the city. He was just a man, one who remembered being hungry himself, one who remembered the nights of silence when his own father couldn't provide. He cleared his throat, regaining his composure. Court will adjourn early today. His voice carried authority again, but this time it carried something else, humanity. As the guards escorted everyone out, the little girl skipped lightly beside her father, clutching the bread. She looked back at the judge and smiled, completely unaware of the storm she had just calmed, or the walls she had torn down. And the judge? He sat in silence, staring at the empty bench before him. For the first time in decades, the courtroom did not feel like a chamber of judgment, but a place where truth, innocence, and humanity had won. The legend of that moment would spread far beyond those walls. Lawyers would whisper it in hushed tones, guards would retell it, and the janitor would remember it for the rest of his life. But above all, everyone who had been there would never forget the day when a little black girl looked at the strictest judge in the city and said the words no one dared to speak. I'm hungry, and those 2 words changed everything.